towards the end of my time here in Jordan, which has been pretty great and also a lot longer than I had initially planned, I am finally going to see Jerash, which are the Roman ruins, which are said to be the world's best preserved. So I'm kind of excited to see this place. I just sort of forced myself to do it on one of my last days. Just jumped in a taxi from Amman without really planning anything. And it's a bit of a long walk towards the main site. So this area looks to be pretty big. And yeah, let's go see what we have. Jerash is Jordan's other premier archaeological site, second only to Petra. And I've been to Jordan a couple of other times, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, and I just felt like I can't leave Jordan without finally seeing this place. And one thing that I instantly noted when I got here is that climatically and topographically it is very, very different than Petra. It's quite green here. And on the drive from Amman, which is rather pleasant, there are all these horticulturalists who are selling flowers and plants and all these sort of verdant accoutrements for the home. It's really beautiful. So immediate impressions of Jerash, or ancient Jarasa, are how incredibly intact this place is. I mean, this doesn't just feel like ruins. This feels like the remnants of a really great city. This was, I'm guessing, part of a trading nexus between ancient Philadelphia and Syria to the north. Some of the history of Jerash is a bit vague in terms of exact specifics. I think that has to do with what archaeologists have found in terms of markings from stone carvers. But I think a lot of this site seems to have been built in the 2nd century AD. And these Ionic columns here, it is thought, although not certain, that they were built during the reign of Emperor Trajan, who I have mentioned probably ad nauseum in the Petra video. Emperor Trajan was the Roman emperor who absorbed the Nabatean kingdom far to the south of here. And here, in these Ionic columns, they ring this gigantic oval plaza, and luckily there's hardly anybody here. It looked like most of the tourists were actually leaving today. I was just reading here that the paving stones here were thought to come a couple of 100 years later. So the columns and the paving stones were actually built at 2 different points in the Roman Empire. These were built sometime in, it's estimated, the 4th century. But yeah, this place is pretty amazing. The scale of it is unbelievable. This is the main street here in Jerash, known as the Cardo, and it's incredibly impressive. I think no place other than maybe parts of Rome itself give you an idea of Rome's grand physicality other than this place. I was reading that the columns actually differ in the types of stone that were used, and also in a civilizational sense, because only some of the columns are actually Roman, and some of the other columns were actually erected or resurrected during the Byzantine era, when the Byzantine Empire was Rome as Christendom in the East, here in Jerash. It is really, really magnificent. I feel like the Roman theater complex and the citadel in Amman with its partial Temple of Hercules is just a teaser for what you'll find here in Jerash. I mean, it's like, you know, you see in Amman, you see a few columns here, a few columns there, you know, a few Corinthian column heads. But I mean, yeah, and it's also so quiet here. It doesn't have the pollution and the constant car horns honking. This place it's just amazing. There's actually supposedly an ancient sewage system here underneath the Cardo. I'm wondering what these structures are here. They look like they may have been ancient shops. They're like little storefronts. Appropriately small for how much smaller people were at the time. Here's another one. And I can just, wow, this thing just clears my head. But yeah, this looks like it could have been an ancient store. Maybe they were selling wine or olives or, you know, loincloths or who knows what. Wow, there's so much to explore here. Kind of like this juxtaposition of this Roman column top with the modern town of Jerash right there. One of the things that I really like about traveling in Jordan is how the ancient world and the present day kind of meld together, and they're all part of one sort of hybrid civilization. So you have, you know, whether it's the Nabateans or the Romans or the early Bedouin tribes that settled in the region. You have, you know, you have modern Jordan, which is Jordanians, Palestinians, Chechens, Circassians. You know, Jordan is not just made up of one group. It's several different ethnicities and sort of nationalities and subnationalities that make up this country, and everybody lives sort of happily among these grand ruins. I mean, look how, I love how tumbled down this is. You know, it's like, you look at some parts of the site and you're like, okay, this hasn't changed in decades. This seems like these were all just sort of put here with no one being quite sure what to do with them. And perpendicular to the Cardo, which is the main street in Jerash, there is the Decamanus, which is a street that is lined with Corinthian columns rather than the Ionic columns that we saw in the Oval Plaza first walking in. And one thing that's a little bit similar to visiting Petra is that all you have to do is go slightly off the main trail and you lose the tour groups and the touts. You can see there's nobody here. There is not a single other person on this giant Roman street. This was thought to have been built in the last quarter of the 2nd century AD, and it's believed to actually have never been finished being constructed. But I mean, I love how you just have this place all to yourself. This is incredible. Now here I'm walking through ruins of a structure that is known, I think sort of colloquially, as the cathedral. It is a Byzantine church that was dated from about the mid-5th century AD, and this is when Byzantium was ruling this area, and the pagan structures dedicated to the Roman gods that had been Greek gods were actually taken apart, and their blocks and columns were used to create churches for early Christendom in the Eastern realm. Here behind me was a fountain that was in the atrium of what was once a Byzantine era cathedral. And there is a legend to be said by a bishop in Cyprus, again, another Cyprus reference while traveling further east, that a few times a year the fountain in the atrium of the cathedral would actually produce wine. And this is, of course, alluding to the miracle of Jesus Christ having turned water into wine. And here, I'm guessing this is the entrance to the cathedral itself. And yeah, it seems to be a rectangular layout. It kind of reminds me, it's like a giant version of the bedrock stones of the cathedrals that I had seen. If you watch the Nicosia Cyprus episode, I stumble on some cathedrals there by the town hall. And this is really interesting because Jerash the ruins are not just about the the peak of Romanness, basically, but they're also very much about Byzantium and Christianity, what came after pagan Rome. And one thing I just want to note, and I'm going to make another Baalbek reference, is that here, the signage here refers to the temples of Zeus and Dionysus as Roman gods, rather than their Roman incarnations of Jupiter and Bacchus, as I mentioned in the episodes in Baalbek. And above the cathedral, we have the much more grand Church of Saint Theodore, which has a pretty amazing view of the town of Jerash. And this is on a whole nother level than the cathedral below. And here you can really see what the height of early Byzantium looked like and how much it physically took from Rome in terms of Rome's physical geography. Byzantium also upended its cultural geography, or its the remnants of pagan Rome's cultural institutions. And this is a perfect example of that, where columns and blocks have been repurposed for the veneration of Jesus. And this is when, the gods, the more the debaucherous gods of the Roman world and the Hellenic world had been done away with, and monotheism, as we've come to know it today, really was coming into being as it grew out of early Judaism. Here behind me was a fountain that was in the atrium of what was once a Byzantine era cathedral. And there is a legend to be said by a bishop in Cyprus, again, another Cyprus reference while traveling further east, that a few times a year the fountain in the atrium of the cathedral would actually produce wine. And this is, of course, alluding to the miracle of Jesus Christ having turned water into wine. And here, I'm guessing this is the entrance to the cathedral itself. And yeah, it seems to be a rectangular layout. It kind of reminds me, it's like a giant version of the bedrock stones of the cathedrals that I had seen. If you watch the Nicosia Cyprus episode, I stumble on some cathedrals there by the town hall. And this is really interesting because Jerash the ruins are not just about the the peak of Romanness, basically, but they're also very much about Byzantium and Christianity, what came after pagan Rome. And one thing I just want to note, and I'm going to make another Baalbek reference, is that here, the signage here refers to the temples of Zeus and Dionysus as Roman gods, rather than their Roman incarnations of Jupiter and Bacchus, as I mentioned in the episodes in Baalbek. I would say that this site spans so much territory that you either need more than one day here, or you need to get a much earlier start than I did. I mean, these sites, I've been to a lot of Roman sites, as I've mentioned in earlier episodes. They're not usually this big. This site just keeps going and going and going. Here is an Odeon, or a theater, that was originally constructed to be more like a kind of a town hall where they would have meetings and they, related to the municipality of Jerash. And apparently this upper section was erected later during either Trajan's rule or Hadrian's rule. It isn't known exactly. I kind of like, as in some of the other sites that I've been going to in this series, I kind of like when things aren't known about certain places. It sort of makes them more interesting, and it makes you feel like there's still room to discover, and there's still, there's still room for growth and learning. Although I wish I had allotted myself a little bit more time here, it's also great to be here later in the day when most of the tour groups are basically being evacuated onto their buses. And it has a very solemn feel during Ramadan as well. You can hear the azan blasting out from minarets surrounding the site. And you just feel like you're walking in the past in this place. I mean, it is absolutely surreal how exquisite this site is. I always miss this place on past trips to Jordan, and I was determined before going to the next country that I absolutely, even if it's on my last day, that I absolutely make it to Jerash. And this place, it does not disappoint. I think we all vaguely know that old expression, Rome wasn't built in a day. Well, it seems to me that the Temple of Artemis here epitomizes that old saying. Only 12 of an estimated 32 columns were ever erected, and the temple was, in fact, never finished. Today, the temple is, the inner sanctum of the temple, rather, is closed to visitors due to issues of erosion and rehabilitation. The sort of post-pagan history of the Temple of Artemis isn't fully known. It is thought that it was subsumed into Byzantium and perhaps became a Byzantine chapel, and maybe the Umayyads used it at some point, and then later the Crusaders who were fighting the Abbasids. I was thinking that the nickname of Rome is the Eternal City. But when you come to a place like Jerash, you kind of think of it as the Eternal Empire. Because the Romans, in their imperium, simply made things that were built to last. Sure, the statues of the gods may be gone. We don't know that much about how the Pantheon was worshipped, and maybe the mosaic floors have been eroded and trampled over time. Artifacts have been looted, over the centuries. But that this city is still here, and this actually feels like the geography of a real city. And the Roman Empire at its zenith had little use for utilitarianism. It did everything with pomp and circumstance. This here was the Nymphaeum, and this was a giant communal water fountain where water was spouting out of the heads of carved lions as the city grew and there was an increased need for water to help the city's economy thrive. The Romans just didn't do anything basic, to put it in today's parlance. They did, I mean, look how incredibly elaborate this is. Can you imagine something back in the EU or the US? You know, the Department of Water and Power somewhere doing something like this today? No, we make buildings that are, you know, square boxes where everything is a sharp angle. There are no curves. There are certainly no lion heads. The Romans did everything with all of this huge amount of flair. It's something to really behold. This site is so big, you can genuinely get lost in it. I feel like I've got to go get to the entrance before it closes, and my driver and I have got to head back to Amman. You know, when you read the history of a place that made the transition from the polytheistic Roman Imperium to Byzantium, it's a little abstract to try and understand what the Roman world was actually like, and I think that has to do with the fact that Byzantium, as part of Christendom, was monotheistic in nature. And if you've grown up in a predominantly monotheistic society, I feel like it's something that you can kind of more understand. There are, you know, crowd symbols that you can recognize, like, say, I don't know, Jesus or Mary or Moses, or, you know, figures like that. And the Roman world, and before it the Hellenistic Greek world, are just, they're kind of more abstract. I think they're things that are, you know, in the period that we live in, they're things that are a little bit harder to grasp. And for me, that's part of what makes, you know, these sites enthralling. I have a feeling the site is about to close, and it may close a little earlier due to Ramadan. I'm kind of just trampling through a series of grassy knolls here to take a shortcut because I want to see the very last of the site before getting back in the car to Amman. Here, behind me, is the great temple of Zeus, or Jupiter as he was known in the Roman era. Now, the Zeus temple is interesting because it is actually larger than the temple of Artemis, which was never finished, and notable because Artemis was the patron goddess of the city, and Zeus, or Jupiter, was not the patron god. Yet it looks like more effort was being put in to the construction of his temple at some point. So it seems maybe there was some sort of a theological schism between those who wanted to emphasize the primacy of Artemis versus those who wanted to emphasize the primacy of Zeus or Jupiter. So maybe there was some sort of a conflict. Who's to say? You can only speculate, really. This place is absolutely splendid at the end of the day. If you guys like this content and want to see more videos like this, I would ask you to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next country. Thanks for watching.